So we're going to move forward. We have now what's called a fireside chat. Please welcome Professor Dr. Claes H. de Vries, University Professor of Artificial Intelligence Society, University of Amsterdam, co-director AI Media and Democracy Lab, who will be talking to, yes, Gabi Zijderveld, co-founder and general partner, Blue Tulip Ventures. Their topic, check this topic out, social and cultural impact of AI. Thoughts about the future. Go, tell us about it.
Thank you, thank you.
All right.
Mic is working.
Thank you for that energetic introduction. I appreciate it, especially this time of day. Professor Claes de Vreese, super excited to have this conversation with you. But before we launch into a chat on this fascinating topic, would you mind telling us a little bit about your work and what you've been focusing on in recent years and this year?
Sure, Gabi, thank you very much, and thanks all for being here. So my name is Claes de Vries. I work here at the University of Amsterdam and also at the University of Southern Denmark, in Denmark, where I'm from originally, despite the very Dutch-sounding name. So my work is currently focused on how media organizations, journalistic organizations, try to deploy AI, and what are some of the dilemmas and challenges that they face. That's one aspect of the work, and the other aspect is how that technology is being used in politics, how political parties, campaigners, candidates are using or choosing not to use generative AI, for example, in their campaigning. So that's some of the work, all under the umbrella of what we call sort of AI, media, politics, and democracy.
Fascinating, and certainly the area of politics, that's a topic one could spend a whole conference on. But maybe let's start at a more higher level. I'd love to ask you to share some of your thoughts and any work you and your team have done around the transformation that AI is now causing in businesses and how they interact and engage with their audiences, their customers.
Yeah, so that I think is one of the big questions right now. How do big corporations, but also smaller businesses and even public sector organizations go into the AI transformation, and what does that mean for the relationship that you have either with your clients and your customers or with your citizens in the case of government? And I think that we can learn a lot from looking to the media business in a way, because they have a dual role. They have a role of selling us a product in terms of news, but they also have a public sector responsibility of trying to provide added value to democratic processes. And that sort of double challenge and double responsibility weighs heavily on the shoulders of the media industry partners when making choices when it comes to AI, in terms of what technologies do they deploy themselves, how do they buy and procure these technologies, and also how much do they bring along their audience. And again, since it's the news media industry, they have a relationship with that audience that is very much built on trust and reputation. Some of these brands have spent decades building up that reputation, and they cannot afford letting that go to waste. So they have this moral dilemma in terms of educating and bringing along their audience in the transformation that they themselves are going through, and what that means for the product that they are offering, and hopefully continuing a trust relationship with that audience. And that's why I believe this is an interesting industry to look at, because some of those dilemmas are so overt and they're so important for democracy. Yeah. Making sure that there is a robust and a strong and a very diverse news and journalistic industry also in the next period is one of the key challenges of democracy in an era where fewer and fewer of us want to pay for news.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many things to unpack in what you just said. For a start, AI really is transforming notions of trust. Even when we think at advances in the recent couple of years in Gen AI, we used to be able to trust what we saw and what we heard, and that's no longer the case. So with the advent and the acceleration of AI development, how do you see the notion of trust transforming? And how do we do this right? And when I say we, all the stakeholders in this.
Thank you for asking the easy questions. This is a real challenge, and I believe that in recent years we've spent quite a lot of time and effort in also developing products that are very much geared as helping us navigate and maybe point out some of the content that is problematic, that is inauthentic, that is maybe manipulated or has been created, but it's becoming increasingly hard to do so. If we had this conversation just a year ago, we would probably be talking about, try to spot the sixth finger and try to look at the imagery like looks unnatural. And today that conversation almost seems old. So we also maybe have to reverse that conversation in a way. Some projections, and whether they are right or not is probably not even the key point here, but some projections are that the internet as we know it today would consist of maybe something like 90% of content that is generated by AI in a not so distant future. No matter what that percentage is, it's safe to assume that there will be a real massive amount of easily generated content out there, and that maybe we need to shift some of the focus to not pointing out only what is problematic, inauthentic and generated, but also not necessarily pointing us to what is truth and right, but what is at least authentic and what has also been through a vetting mechanism of something like a news organization that lives up to standards, and focus some of the attentions to that in order to maintain the trust relationship. One of the biggest challenges that we also see in research is that we move from a period of time where we spent a lot of time talking about fake news, and you could discard new pieces of information and, oh, that's probably fake news, and the new one is, oh, but that's probably AI generated. And a lot of, it would be very valuable to have a concerted effort into highlighting also in the distribution mechanism on social media platforms, some of that content that is at least authentic and that is also produced according to certain standards. Yeah. And that, I believe, is a part of that big puzzle of how to restore and maintain trust relationships in the future. Yeah.
Do you see any organizations or technologies out there today that are kind of making strides in the right direction towards that?
So there are some, and that's also one of the challenges. There are, of course, the industry-wide initiative, CP2A, with Adobe and with others that are trying to develop ways in order to signal and showcase the verification of material that you're seeing. And I think it's very important to stress that that is not about making some kind of truth marker on information, but only to signify that the image that you see, yes, it was taken on this location and this was the original image. It has not been cropped, it has not been morphed, or this is the new story, or this is the quote that comes from the original source. Again, that's not a judgment as to whether or not we like that source or whether the source is necessarily truthful, but at least it is the authentic marker. Now that, I think, is one example that is getting some traction. There are multiple other examples in some of the research that we have been involved with. We have worked with cryptography to also create digital signatures that can travel with either quotes or with visual material, which I don't believe that we would argue that you would need to have a visual marker on the product itself, but that it would be something that if you were to click on that material, you could at least see whether that digital signature was there. And that, I think, is an ecosystem of trial and error and hopefully a lot of developments. And then in the long run, there has to be some kind of standardization and the industry coming together, because otherwise we will have as many verification systems as we will have providers of content.
Yeah. And you mentioned standardization. What role do you think the regulatory bodies have to play in this? Is there room to do better on that front?
Regulation is important, and in this space, of course, we are right now. 2024 was kind of interesting because we were in a year of somewhat of an interbellum in terms of regulation, that there were a lot of new regulation, at least coming in Europe, both in terms of the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act, and the first sort of parts of the implementation of the AI Act. But the regulation will typically only give us frameworks and will not give that level of sort of technical specificity as to what to do. And maybe it shouldn't either, right? Because regulation is slow and it's typically post hoc, but it sets out parameters and it gives a number of principles to work through. What's very important is that multiple stakeholders, representatives such as those present in a conference and an event like this, come together and try to work through some of these things, because there's I genuinely believe a joint interest. The previous session that we just heard was about public-private partnerships, and that is also an approach that is extremely important in the field of when it comes to democracy and trying to get the technology right for democracy.
For sure. You said something just now, it got me thinking, right? So there's a lot of criticism that is directed at technology companies to deliver or to build in more clarity and transparency on how AI works, right? And always hear AI is a black box, and these technologies advance, it will certainly, some aspects of that will become more severe. But yeah, for sure, there's a role in the tech industry to provide more clarity and explanation to the users. But in your opinion, the end users, is there some level of ownership or responsibility they have in getting more educated or more savvy on what's really happening out there in AI?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. Sort of what is on us as end users, as consumers, as citizens in democracies, and there are multiple things. I think the short answer is it should not only be up to the end user. That's an unreasonable ask and requirement. So that's why you do need regulation, you do need rules of the game, you do need responsible companies in this space. But of course there's also a role for end users, and we have seen in the sort of social media development over the past years that we are also, hard to deal with as humans in this space, right? We have a preference for all kind of things where we probably think that's not the kind of information we should be sharing and engaging with most. But we also see that there's a huge diversity in who we are as end users. And some of the research that we have, others have also been involved in when it comes to AI literacy, which is sort of the, let's say, the next chapter in the discussions of media literacy and digital literacy, is also cultivating a degree of AI literacy there. And some of the early work is really suggesting how diverse that conversation is, both in different countries, but also within countries. And generations and age and education make a big difference here. But let's not assume that that big difference means that the higher educated white males are the best ones to operate in this space. No, I think we see that especially younger generations are much more savvy in this space, and that it is those with many gray hairs and the like that actually deserve a lot of attention in this right now. So that role that we play is obviously one of being an active component of that ecosystem, but we need to provide a certain sort of security network in order for individuals to exercise that responsibility. And there really is a huge educational challenge ahead of us, but it is not an educational challenge that we can just dump in the school system and high schools or at the universities, because it is a lifespan challenge that we're standing in front of.
Lifespan challenge. And I love the notion of AI literacy, and it definitely needs to be a multi-stakeholder initiative, if you will. And I have hope for the younger generation when I hear my daughter speak about AI and transparency, or lack thereof. Maybe there's hope for that. I do want to touch briefly, and then I'm thinking maybe we could take a question or two from the audience. I would love to get your thoughts, and again, this is a huge topic, I know, but maybe some immediate thoughts you have on AI and the threat to democracy, especially when we think in the political landscape. We all know there's big elections coming up, not just in the US, around the world. What are some of the areas of concern you see, and maybe even potential ways that we need to work around some of that?
Yeah, so it's really a privilege to be able to talk about AI and democracy and politics in the year of 2024. I think when the year started and in the last months of last year, we were preparing ourselves for the year that would upend all elections and end public faith in democracy. And maybe the good news, which was also discussed earlier this morning at the main stage, was that it hasn't come to that. But let's also just not be naive in this space. We have also not seen an election in 2024 where there was not some kind of instance of the deployment of generative AI or a discussion about authenticity or a discussion about one candidate deploying it to either promote herself or himself or attacking a counter candidate. So I think the safe conclusion for 2024 is it has become part of the electoral toolkit, and it wasn't a year ago. It hasn't. So far, we haven't seen the what I call the smoking AI gun, the sort of the deep fake, AI-generated deep fake that goes viral in the last 24 hours of an election and completely flips it to the other side to an unexpected outcome. I don't believe we have seen that. There are still elections to come in 2024, so who knows? But it's also not the right place to look at if we're only looking at that, and if we are saying that smoking AI gun would need to be the evidence of this being a risk or a potential harm to democracy. I believe we need to look at it broader. We need to look at how it is deployed even within parties to communicate with voters. We need to look at what is happening down ballot. So a lot of attention goes to the deployment of these technologies to the top candidates, and everything that Kamala Harris or Trump is doing is of course scrutinized, so there's a lot of attention there. This will be picked up, this will be discussed, but that's not the case in races that are lower or candidates that are more unknown. Those are some of the areas where we need to pay attention, and I think we also have gone into 2024 paying a lot of attention to the role of images and that part of generative AI, but only have we marginally touched on the role of sound, for example. And we saw the examples of the robocalls in the United States elections only early in the campaign when Biden was still a candidate. Exactly. But there are simply aspects of that I think it's also too soon to conclude that okay, this did not end up being the disaster that was predicted at the beginning of 2024. No, it means that luckily we maybe made it to October, but this is a conversation that is really in need of continuation, because this is not a solved issue for democracy.
Yeah, and it again brings it square back to the notion of trust, and is there fundamentally trust that we have and can foster. Do we have time for two more minutes? So if anyone has a question, raise your hand, and while the mic gets passed around, if there is a question, I'm going to ask you one last question, a bit of a cliche one, but in all of this, do you see some kind of AGI doom scenario where the horrible AI is going to overtake us all, or are you more of an optimist?
Yeah, so I'm going to take the professor privilege of saying that's a false dichotomy of being either one or the other. I don't believe we can think about it this way, but I also actually think that it's really counterproductive to talk about it this way. And let me just say that the only thing that has come out of the doom scenario thinking so far has been huge investment in the AI sector. The last year has taught us that every single letter, every single interview that is given by a captain of industry led to huge new investments in the AI industry. Maybe that's the doom scenario we should worry most about.
Love that, love that. Any questions? And if not, we will wrap up. Oh, there's a question? Yeah.
Sorry, how do you think companies deploying AI can help in this digital literacy, AI literacy, because they are a key stakeholder in this?
Yeah, so how AI can also help in this space. I mean, some of the interesting things that we have seen is also, for example, political parties that have been experimenting with making their electoral platforms and their programs more accessible. I mean, let's face it, they're horrible to read, nobody reads them. AI technologies can actually make them accessible in a way more easy manner to different audiences, can bring in different perspectives, could even make them more sort of interactive to think about. So that's just, I think, leveraging some relatively simple chatbot technologies, but is one way that can be used to make politics more accessible. So I'm not a total pessimist either when it comes to these technologies and democracy. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, cool. Claes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Gabi.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Super cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.